Chapter 1. The Invitation to Briarwood. It was a damp and misty morning in late October when Detective Jane Parsons received the invitation that would lead her into one of the most intricate cases of her career. She was seated in her drawing room, sipping her morning tea while reading the Times, when a sharp knock came, precise and deliberate. Her housekeeper, Mrs. Ellison, answered the door, and moments later entered with a small envelope on a silver tray, her brow raised. "For you, Miss Parsons, delivered by a footman, quite the fuss." Jane took the envelope with mild curiosity. The heavy parchment bore a gold-embossed crest, a rampant lion framed by a laurel wreath, and the wax seal was deep crimson, unbroken. She recognised the insignia at once. It was the personal seal of Lord Oswald Penhaligon, a man whose name drifted through political circles and whispered social gossip like cigar smoke in a gentleman's club. She broke the seal and unfolded the stiff card inside. "Miss Parsons, you are cordially invited to Briarwood Hall this weekend for a gathering of select company. Your presence is requested not merely for leisure, but in the spirit of observation. There are matters of discretion best left unwritten. A motor car shall arrive at noon on Friday. With warm regards, Lord Oswald Penhaligon." Jane read the note twice, then set it aside, thoughtful. Matters of discretion best left unwritten. That was Lord Penhaligon all over. An influential man in political society, he was known for his lavish parties and his discreet handling of delicate affairs. That he had summoned her, a private investigator known mostly to aristocrats and certain discreet departments of government, suggested something more than an innocent house party. Mrs. Ellison hovered by the door, wiping her hands on her apron. "Shall I begin packing, miss?" she asked, ever the practical woman. Jane looked up, her expression unreadable. "Yes, something formal for dinner, and something warm. We'll be in the countryside." By Friday noon, Jane was dressed in her usual travelling attire, a tailored navy coat, smart gloves, and a cloche hat set at a modest angle. Her only luggage was a leather travel case, efficiently packed. The motor car had arrived, and Jane climbed in with her customary quiet poise. The journey to Briarwood Hall took nearly 3 hours, winding through fog-veiled lanes, sleepy hamlets, and stretches of forest where the trees stood tall and grave like sentinels. By the time the iron gates of Briarwood creaked open, the sky had turned the colour of tarnished pewter. The hall itself rose out of the mist like a storybook palace, gabled rooftops, ivy-covered stone walls, and tall windows that glowed faintly with the warmth of gaslight. The driveway curved through an immaculate lawn where stone statues loomed half-hidden in the autumn fog. Jane was greeted at the great oak door by Mrs. Langley, the housekeeper, tall, pinched, with greying hair pulled into a stern bun. "Miss Parsons," she said with a nod, "you're expected. His lordship is in the conservatory. Shall I show you to your room first?" "Please." The guest chambers were on the second floor, tastefully appointed in rich damasks and soft carpets. Jane noted the heavy drapes, the discreet bell-pull beside the bed, and the curious absence of mirrors, a detail she found odd, but filed away. Once refreshed and unpacked, she descended to the conservatory. Lord Penhaligon was standing by the windows. He turned as she entered, a half-smile playing beneath his silver moustache. "Miss Parsons, punctual as always." "Good afternoon, my lord. Your note was intriguing." Penhaligon poured her a sherry and offered it wordlessly. "There's been no crime, not yet," he said, seating himself in a wicker chair. "But I have reason to believe that something is afoot. I need someone discreet, someone who can observe without drawing suspicion. You are, I believe, uniquely qualified." Jane tilted her head. "May I ask what you suspect?" He gave a dry chuckle. "That's the trouble. I suspect something, but not someone. I've had unsettling communications. Items moved, whispers in the staff corridors. A gift recently arrived from the Russian consulate, very rare, very valuable. I worry it's become a target, and as you may know, I have enemies, political and otherwise. Jane nodded slowly. So I am to be another guest at your weekend gathering, while in reality I observe and report? Exactly. We are 8 at the table, 4 guests of note, and a game of bridge tomorrow night that will reveal more than just cards, I dare say. There was a pause. Do keep your wits about you, Miss Parsons, Penhaligon said quietly. There are games within games, and some, I fear, may be playing for keeps. As Jane returned to her room to prepare for dinner, she passed the portraits that lined the long corridor, stern ancestors in powdered wigs, faded war heroes, and women with eyes like secrets. The air carried the scent of beeswax and old paper. She had attended many house parties in the name of investigation, but something about Briarwood Hall felt different. Chapter 2. The players take their seats. Dinner that evening at Briarwood Hall was a grand affair. The long oak dining table, polished to a mirror sheen, was set with silver flatware, crystal glasses, and bone china edged in gold. A chandelier of Austrian crystal hung above, its light reflecting in 1,000 tiny flames. Jane Parsons arrived precisely at 7, dressed in a gown of deep green velvet and a string of pearls that had once belonged to her mother. Her eyes, cool and observant, took in every detail, particularly the guests, each one a character unto themselves. At the head of the table sat Lord Oswald Penhaligon, the host. Immaculately dressed in black evening wear, he exuded quiet power, the kind that needs no introduction. His silver hair gleamed beneath the candlelight, and he surveyed his guests like a man who had gathered them for a purpose not entirely social. To his left sat Lady Cecily Penhaligon, his wife, and a woman of remarkable poise. Slender and pale, with an angular beauty and eyes like blue frost, she wore a gown of grey silk and a diamond brooch shaped like a peacock feather. Jane noted that she barely touched her wine and spoke very little, only when directly addressed. Next was Major Bertrand Hughes, the former army man. His weathered face bore the marks of sun and wind, his moustache trimmed with military precision. He had the air of a man who still gave orders, even in retirement. Hughes had spent years in the British colonies and often reminisced loudly, with a tone that barely concealed contempt for anyone who hadn't. Then there was Clara de Vries, an elegant Dutchwoman who described herself as an art dealer. She was vivacious and charming, perhaps a touch too much so. She wore a daring dress in sapphire blue, and her eyes sparkled with amusement as she exchanged witty banter with the men. Her accent was lilting, but Jane detected the faintest edge of calculation beneath the surface. Finally, there was Miles Everstone, the youngest guest by far. In his early 30s, with sharp features and a restless energy, he was a rising member of Parliament and known for his ambitious speeches on trade and foreign policy. He laughed often, but his gaze darted like a bird's, always scanning, always judging. 2 others rounded out the table, the Reverend Mr. Greaves, a portly and red-faced country parson who had known the Penhaligons since childhood, and Miss Agatha Marlowe, an elderly cousin of Lady Cecily's, half-deaf and wholly indifferent to the rest of the company. And then there was Jane, seated midway down the table between Miles and Clara, her presence explained by Lord Penhaligon as an old friend of the family with a fine appreciation for bridge. Conversation over dinner was polite, but not entirely natural. There was an undercurrent of tension, subtle like a faint draught in an otherwise warm room. Jane listened rather than spoke, watching how glances lingered, how remarks were veiled. The soup was leek and potato, followed by a delicate trout with almond butter and a roast pheasant with blackberry sauce. The wine flowed generously, and though Lady Cecily barely drank, Major Hughes and Miles Everstone accepted every refill. At one point, Hughes leaned across Clara de Vries to speak to Jane. "You don't strike me as the typical country house guest, Miss Parsons. You're too quiet." Jane smiled politely. "And yet, I imagine I'll learn quite a lot, Major." He barked a laugh. "Oh, I don't doubt it. These gatherings are like war camps. Alliances, betrayals, peace treaties brokered in the drawing room. You just have to listen to the right whispers." Jane looked at him. "You sound as though you've played the game before." He raised his glass. "Always." After dinner, the company moved to the drawing room for brandy and cigars. A fire roared in the hearth, and a gramophone played something soft and continental. The men gathered near the mantel, while the women drifted to the settees, some with embroidery, others with cards. Clara de Vries eventually rose and approached Lord Penhaligon. "You promised us a bridge game, my lord," she said playfully. "Is that to be tomorrow?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, after tea. A little tournament, perhaps. I think it will prove illuminating." Jane noticed the glimmer in his eye, the deliberate weight of his words. Clara clapped her hands. "Then let it be settled. I adore bridge. So revealing, don't you think? Not just of skill, but of temperament." Miles chimed in from the corner. "I've never played bridge with an art dealer before. I assume you bluff like a painter, dramatically." Clara laughed. Lady Cecily, from her seat near the fireplace, said in a tone as cold as the fog outside, "We've had enough drama, I think." The last bridge game we hosted ended with someone storming out. "An unfortunate misunderstanding," Lord Penhaligon said swiftly, "but I'm confident our guest this time will behave." Lady Cecily's lips thinned. "Let us hope so." Later, as the house quieted and guests drifted off to bed, Jane remained in the drawing room, ostensibly reviewing the evening papers. Lord Penhaligon returned briefly, his brow lined. "You saw them," he said quietly. "I did." "Any first impressions?" She considered for a moment. "They all hide something. The question is, which secrets are petty, and which are worth killing for?" Penhaligon stared into the fire. "Tomorrow's game will bring things into focus. Watch them closely, Miss Parsons. The bridge table often reveals more than confessions ever could." She inclined her head. "I intend to." She walked up the grand staircase to her chamber, the gas lamps flickering on either side, wondering what the game tomorrow may reveal. Chapter 3. A Vanishing Treasure. The next morning, Jane Parsons rose early, long before the rest of the house stirred. She always preferred to walk before breakfast, a habit she had formed a decade ago. The gardens were still, save for the occasional caw of a crow or the rustle of leaves as a gardener trimmed the hedges. Jane strolled along the flagstone path toward the east wing, noting the architectural details of the house. Elaborate stonework, narrow balconies, and a network of interconnecting doors and corridors that made it, as she thought to herself, a perfect stage for private affairs, and even more private disappearances. When she returned, the house was beginning to wake. Servants moved silently through the halls. The breakfast table was being set with silver pots of coffee, tea, warm rolls, and boiled eggs. Most guests filtered in by 9. Clara de Vries arrived first, resplendent in a burgundy morning gown, her blonde hair piled high. "Good morning, Miss Parsons," she said with a grin. "I trust your dreams were not as foggy as the weather." "I rarely dream at all," Jane replied. "Reality tends to be interesting enough." Clara gave a short laugh and took a seat by the window. "Quite right." Soon after came Major Hughes, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and Miles Everstone, looking ever so slightly the worse for wear, his eyes bloodshot, his cravat askew. Lady Cecily joined last, her expression unreadable. She barely spoke throughout the meal. Her hands were pale, her fingers long and motionless. Lord Penhaligon did not appear at breakfast. By late morning, the guests had scattered across the property, some to the library, others to the gardens or billiard room. Jane took the opportunity to explore the house with practised subtlety. She traced her way back through the east corridors and past the study, Lord Penhaligon's private domain. The heavy oak door was closed, but she paused, noting the lock. An elaborate brass fixture with a double keyhole. Not the sort one could pick without considerable skill. By midday, the guests gathered in the drawing-room, waiting for Lord Penhaligon to appear for lunch. But he did not come. It was just after 1 o'clock when Mrs. Langley, the housekeeper, entered the room, pale and flustered. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her apron. "I beg your pardon," she said, her voice trembling. "His lordship asks that Miss Parsons attend him in the study at once. It is a matter of some urgency." Jane's gaze flicked to the others. Lady Cecily's lips pursed. Clara raised an eyebrow. Major Hughes narrowed his eyes but said nothing. Jane rose. "Of course." The study was a grand room lined with bookcases, a vast oriental rug, and 2 tall windows shrouded in velvet curtains. Lord Penhaligon stood at his desk, his normally composed face etched with tension. The French doors leading to the garden were slightly ajar, letting in the scent of damp earth and autumn leaves. He gestured for her to enter and shut the door behind her. "It's gone," he said flatly. "The egg." "The Fabergé?" Jane asked. He nodded and moved aside to reveal a glass display cabinet behind his desk. Its doors hung open. Inside, velvet-lined compartments displayed various objets d'art, miniature paintings, an ivory chess set, and a carved jade elephant. But the central pedestal was empty. "No signs of forced entry," he continued, "and the study has been locked since last evening. Only I, my valet, and Mrs. Langley have keys." Jane crossed to the cabinet and examined it. No shattered glass, no scratches around the lock. "When did you last see the egg?" "Last night, after the guests had retired. I came in for a book, and it was there, glinting like a flame. This morning I intended to show it to you, as a precaution. When I unlocked the study just now, it was gone." "Who else knows about it?" "The guests may suspect its value, but none have seen it closely, except for Clara de Vries. She examined it briefly in my presence 2 days ago. She seemed very interested." Jane walked slowly around the room, taking in the layout. The French doors, the fireplace, the row of cabinets and drawers. Then she looked down. There, barely visible in the thick rug, was the faint impression of a shoe. Not the heavy tread of Lord Penhaligon's polished slippers, but something narrower, more delicate. She knelt and traced the edge of it with a gloved hand. This was made recently, and whoever it was stepped carefully, likely to avoid leaving more than a trace. Penhaligon's brow furrowed. "You suspect one of the guests." "I suspect everyone," Jane said softly, "until I have reason not to." That afternoon, a quiet unease settled over Briarwood Hall. Though Lord Penhaligon made no announcement, Jane noticed that the guests became increasingly restless. Clara was seen pacing the lawn alone. Major Hughes spent an unusual amount of time speaking with the footman. Miles took to the billiard room with a glass of whisky and struck the balls with increasing agitation. Lady Cecily remained in her room. The bridge table had been set in the blue salon by 4 o'clock. Crystal ashtrays, neatly arranged scorecards, and delicate pastries sat ready on the sideboard. But the players were less enthusiastic than before. "I must admit," Miles said, fidgeting with his cufflink, "this whole atmosphere has grown rather odd. Our host remains secluded, and I hear the staff muttering about missing objects." "Missing?" Clara turned sharply. "What objects?" Miles shrugged. I only know what the footman let slip. Something valuable, I gather. Jane said nothing. She sat quietly, observing their reactions. I suppose we shall find out in due course, Major Hughes muttered. The walls here are thick, but secrets have a way of slipping through the cracks. The first hand of bridge was dealt. Cards were drawn, smiles were offered. But beneath the surface, something churned, like smoke rising through floorboards. And as the players took their seats at the polished table, Jane Parsons watched each of them with quiet precision. A treasure had vanished, and someone at that very table knew precisely where it had gone. Chapter 4. A Toast to Silence. The bridge game concluded just after 5 o'clock, with no small degree of distraction. Jane Parsons had noted that none of the players, except perhaps Lady Cecily, were truly focused on the cards. The atmosphere in the blue salon was thick with unspoken questions. Though the theft had not been announced, the whispers had spread like ivy creeping across old stone. Something had been stolen, something valuable. Everyone had heard it. No one had said it aloud. By 6 o'clock the house was in a quiet flurry. The game table was cleared away, tea had been served with little fanfare, and the guests retired to change for dinner. Jane had excused herself and returned briefly to the study, where Lord Penhaligon sat at his desk, staring at a glass of untouched sherry. It was no common thief, he said quietly as Jane entered. The study was locked. The egg was hidden among other valuables, yet it alone was taken. This was someone who knew what to look for. Jane nodded. And someone who knows how to act quickly. Penhaligon looked up. You formed a theory? Several, all fragile. Will you question them directly? Jane shook her head. Not yet. Sometimes people reveal more when they think no one is watching. He smiled faintly. A skill you've mastered, I suspect. Dinner that evening was a far quieter affair than the night before. The candlelight flickered uneasily, and the conversation was polite, but fragmented. Major Hughes drank deeply and talked of cavalry formations. Clara de Vries responded to him with smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. Miles Everstone arrived late, claiming to have fallen asleep after the game, though his expression was tense and drawn. Lady Cecily said almost nothing at all. Jane, once again seated between Clara and Miles, remained quiet, observing the intricate threads between the guests. Miles and Hughes exchanging guarded glances. Clara de Vries watching Lord Penhaligon with just a little too much interest. Lady Cecily barely eating, her eyes fixed at some point just beyond the candlelight. After the main course, beef tornadoes with red wine juice, the footman cleared the plates and brought in decanters of port and 2 bottles of Chateau Margaux, a rare vintage Penhaligon had long kept in his private cellar. Lady Cecily raised an eyebrow as the footman uncorked one of the bottles. "Is this not a touch excessive?" she asked her husband. Penhaligon smiled. "I thought a treat might restore spirits. We're all a little weary today." "Indeed," murmured Clara, "but perhaps this is the calm before something rather stormy." A curious silence followed. The wine was poured, glasses lifted, a few light toasts were made, one from Major Hughes to better weather, another from Miles, dry and hurried, to the elusive pleasures of bridge. Jane did not drink. Instead, she watched, and it was a good thing she did. 10 minutes later, as the guests moved to the drawing-room, the fire was crackling, the wine had begun to settle into bloodstreams, and conversation was slowly returning to its polite rhythm. Until Clara de Vries suddenly placed her hand on the sideboard, as though seeking balance. "Excuse me," she said, blinking. How strange. I feel—" Her voice faltered. She took a step forward, then swayed and collapsed to the floor. The room erupted. "Clara!" Lady Cecily gasped, rushing forward. Miles dropped his glass with a loud shatter. Hughes crouched beside her, placing 2 fingers to her neck. His jaw stiffened. "She's not breathing." Penhaligon barked an order to the butler. "Fetch doctor." Thistle, immediately. But Jane was already moving. She knelt by Clara's side and checked for a pulse. There was none. She looked at her eyes, wide, startled, glassy. Her skin had paled dramatically, and then a faint scent, almost metallic, lingered on her breath. Jane looked up. "She's dead," she said quietly, "and I believe she was poisoned." A horrified silence fell upon the room. "No," Lady Cecily whispered. "Surely not. How—" "She was fine just moments ago," Miles cried, pacing like a caged animal. "She was laughing." Jane rose slowly to her feet. Her voice was calm but commanding. "No one is to leave the manor. Lock all doors. Have the servants remain in their quarters. This is no longer a private affair, Lord Penhaligon." He nodded grimly. "Of course." Major Hughes rose, his hand clenched into a fist. "You think she was murdered?" Jane met his gaze. "I'm certain of it." "But how?" he demanded. "The wine? The food? We all ate the same." "Not quite," Jane said, her voice turning sharp. "You'll forgive me, Major, but some of you switched glasses during the toast. I noticed Miss de Vries and Miles Everstone both reach for the same one." There was a hesitation, a moment of confusion. Miles paled. I didn't mean—" Lady Cecily rose, her voice trembling. She was charming. She wouldn't have had an enemy here." "Oh, wouldn't she?" Hughes snapped. "She had more secrets than smiles, that one." "Enough," Lord Penhaligon said quietly, his face ashen. "Miss Parsons will handle this." Jane's mind raced. The Fabergé egg, now a murder. Clara dead. What had she known? What had she planned to do? Later that night, after the body had been moved and the guests retired in a state of dazed horror, Jane remained in the drawing-room with the door locked behind her. She examined the wine decanter, the glasses, the cork. She sniffed each carefully, and then she found it, a thin, oily residue on the rim of one of the glasses, not visible to the eye, but sharp to the trained nose. Belladonna, a poison of choice for those who wish death to look like fainting. She straightened, her jaw set. Clara had known something. She had perhaps seen too much, guessed too well, and someone had silenced her. Jane glanced around the darkened drawing-room, its shadows long and watching. The game had changed. This was no longer about a theft. This was about murder. Chapter 5. Secrets Under the Surface. The morning after Clara de Vries's sudden death arrived like a thunderclap cloaked in silence. Jane sat alone in the library, a tall stack of bridge scorecards before her, along with the guest list and a sketch she had made of the drawing-room during the toast the night before. She had not slept more than 2 hours. There had been no time. She had sent word to the local constabulary to hold their approach, insisting that for now the investigation must remain quiet. Too much noise might scare off truths not yet ready to show themselves. Lord Penhaligon, visibly shaken by the night's events, had agreed. At precisely 10 o'clock, Jane requested to see each person, one at a time, in the drawing-room, now transformed from a social space into a discreet interrogation chamber. First was Lady Cecily Penhaligon. Lady Cecily entered in her customary grey, a high lace collar brushing her jawline. Her eyes were cool, but not emotionless. "You'll understand," she said, taking a seat near the fire, "that the mere implication of scandal is intolerable." Jane didn't respond to the threat. "You were seated closest to Clara when she collapsed." "I noticed. You also barely touched your wine." "I never do. Wine encourages men to believe they're more interesting than they are." Jane permitted herself the briefest smile. "Did you know Miss de Vries well?" She was charming in that detached foreign way. She reminded me of a bird looking for a better perch. I think she believed herself clever. Did she ever speak of the Fabergé egg? Lady Cecily blinked slowly. Only once. She asked whether it was insured. And is it? No. Cecily's voice turned dry. Oswald keeps certain treasures out of official ledgers. There are political sensitivities. You understand. Jane studied her. Was Clara involved with your husband? Lady Cecily gave a soft, sardonic laugh. My dear Miss Parsons, my husband is a man of appetites. Clara was certainly his type, though I don't believe he succeeded. She was far too strategic to become anyone's trophy. Did you know she'd been poisoned? Cecily leaned forward. I knew the moment I saw her eyes, but I also know better than to scream accusations when someone's still holding the wine. Next was Major Bertrand Hughes. Hughes entered briskly, his boots loud on the polished floor. You suspect me, he said without preamble, because I served abroad and know a thing or two about poisons. Jane gestured to the chair opposite her. I suspect everyone until the facts absolve them. You were quite vocal last night. I detest deception. Clara de Vries was a manipulator. She tried to charm me once. Didn't take. Did she speak to you about Russian artefacts? She spoke of buyers, high ones. She was sniffing around Lord Penhaligon's collection, asked me if I'd seen similar eggs during my posting in St. Petersburg. And had you? He paused. Yes, I was stationed there briefly. The egg was one of a matched pair, diplomatic gifts to the British Crown during a peace visit. The other is in the Kremlin. Or was. You believe she intended to steal it? I believe she intended to profit from it. She may have been working with someone, perhaps one of the guests. I wouldn't put it past that little Everstone boy. Rats like him thrive on foreign trinkets. Jane made a note. Did you see anyone near the study before the theft? No, but I saw Miles sneaking toward the billiard room around midnight, just after the house had gone quiet. Third came Miles Everstone. He entered looking pale, his eyes shadowed, a different man from the confident politician of 2 nights prior. I didn't kill her, he said before Jane could speak. God, I barely knew her. But you were seen near the study late at night. I had gone out for air, he said quickly, then into the billiard room to calm myself. I couldn't sleep. Did you handle any of the wine glasses last night after they were poured? His eyes flicked away. Possibly. There was confusion. I think I reached for hers by mistake. You hesitated, Jane said. I saw it. She smiled at me and said, Shall we toast to better luck? Then she reached for the glass I had touched. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? Did Clara ever mention the egg to you? Yes, once. She joked that it could start a war if it fell into the wrong hands. Jane raised an eyebrow. Did she say it was in the wrong hands? He hesitated again. Number. But she seemed nervous lately, kept checking over her shoulder. I thought maybe she was running from something. Or someone, Jane said quietly. Lord Penhaligon entered last, slower than usual, as if weighed down by more than age. She came here looking for something, he said, before she could ask. That much is now clear. Did she know about the egg? She knew about the egg. I never told her directly, but I let her see it. She asked to examine it, claimed it was similar to one sold in Amsterdam. Her fingers lingered too long. Did you trust her? No, he said simply, but I liked her. Enough to lie for her. Not enough to kill her. Jane studied him. Did you see Miles Everstone that night? Penhaligon sighed. Yes, he came to my study around 10, claimed he'd left a notebook on one of the shelves. I found it odd. He's not exactly the literary sort. Do you think he could have taken the egg? I think everyone here is capable of something they hope never to admit. That evening, After dinner, Jane returned to the library alone, her brain full of thoughts. Clara had known of the egg. She had confided in several guests. She was likely planning to sell it, or blackmail someone with it. Someone had beaten her to it, and someone had killed her to keep her silent. But the killer had made a mistake. Clara had said, "Shall we toast to better luck?" A private joke, perhaps, but also an indication. She knew her glass had been swapped. She drank anyway. Why? Unless she believed it was safe. Unless she had a plan of her own. A game within a game. Jane stood and opened Clara's travel bag, which had been retrieved by the staff. Inside were silk dresses, perfume, and at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, a small leather-bound notebook, its pages covered in tight looping script. It was a log, a list of names, meetings, transactions, and next to the entry for October 30th, the day before the bridge game. Final deal to be made. E will approach after dinner. If not, contingency plan in motion. Jane's eyes narrowed. E? Everstone? Or someone else entirely? Chapter 6. The Russian Connection. Each entry in Clara's journal revealed more than idle thoughts. The writing was meticulous. Names, places, prices, and occasional cryptic phrases. Some entries were marked with symbols, a triangle, a star, and once, beside a particularly urgent note, a small hand-drawn flame. Jane had spent the previous night translating what she could. Several passages were in Dutch, and one short paragraph, clearly hurried, was in Russian. She stared at the line again now. Her Russian was rusty, but she read it slowly. Gift from Nikolai. Kept at Briarwood, not for sale until confirmed. A diplomatic gift, from Tsar Nicholas II, no less. That aligned with what Major Hughes had hinted at. The Fabergé egg wasn't merely rare. It was part of a royal diplomatic exchange, possibly one that had never been officially recorded. Such an item, if made public, could trigger a storm. Not just political embarrassment for the British aristocracy, but tension between nations. No wonder Penhaligon had kept it off the books, and no wonder someone had been willing to kill for it. Jane needed confirmation. She descended to the servants' wing, quietly, as the rest of the house began to stir, and asked for Anya, one of the maids. A shy, mousy young woman from St. Petersburg, Anya had kept mostly to herself since Jane's arrival. But Jane had noticed the way she stiffened slightly whenever the name Russia was mentioned. Anya was found polishing silver in the scullery. "Miss Parsons?" she asked nervously, wiping her hands on her apron. "I wonder," Jane said gently, "if you might read something for me." She presented the page with the Russian line. Anya's eyes scanned it quickly. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed it back. "This is very dangerous note." Jane gave her a moment. "Can you tell me what it means?" "It speaks of egg, a Fabergé, given by Tsar to British family. It says to keep it hidden until confirmation." She paused, then whispered, "This egg is not meant to be sold. It is symbol dot. A symbol of what?" Anya glanced around, lowered her voice. "There is legend. Tsar had made 2 eggs to seal peace before war. One stayed in Russia, the other came here. It means alliance. If sold, stolen, it would be insult. Some say it was a message between royal families." Jane's mind spun. Who else would know this? Anya hesitated. "Clara, she asked me 2 nights ago. She showed me drawing of egg. I said I did not know, but she knew I lied." "Why didn't you tell Lord Penhaligon?" Anya looked down. "I am servant. I do not belong to World of Lords and Games." Jane touched her arm lightly. "Sometimes it's the ones who listen in silence that see the clearest." Anya hesitated once more, then added in a whisper, "I saw something." Before dinner, night she died, in hallway, Mr. Everstone and Clara. They were arguing. She said, "You want it for power, but you don't know what it means." Then she walked away. Jane nodded slowly. "Thank you, Anya. That's very helpful." That afternoon, Jane examined the glass display cabinet in the study once more. It had been opened with a key, not forced. There was no sign of damage, just the absence of the egg. But one detail stood out now that the firelight caught the glass. A fingerprint, not smudged, not wiped, almost proudly left behind. Jane stepped back. Whoever had taken the egg wanted it to seem like a quiet theft, but had left behind just enough to draw attention. Someone was toying with appearances. She turned to the leather armchair beside the cabinet, and there, folded neatly under the cushion, was a scrap of paper. It looked like a telegram torn in haste. Only part of it remained. "Payment confirmed. Dutch intermediary compromised. Proceed to alternate buyer. See." She frowned. Dutch intermediary. Clara. The scrap of telegram had been hidden well. Only someone who knew the room intimately could have tucked it there unnoticed. And that narrowed the field. Jane found Miles Everstone in the library, seated with a drink he hadn't touched, gazing at the rain. "You knew what Clara had," she said without preamble. He didn't turn. Everyone suspected, but no one had proof, not until she started waving it about like bait. Jane sat across from him. "You argued with her before dinner." His jaw tightened. "She threatened to name you. She had that notebook, recorded meetings, entries. You were on her list." He looked at her now. "She wanted to make a deal. I said it was too dangerous. She laughed, told me danger was currency. She said the egg could destroy reputations, my reputation." "So you killed her?" "No." He stood. "I wanted her to leave. I told her to take the egg and go. That night I went to the study, not to steal, but to make sure it was still there." Jane said nothing. "She was playing everyone," he added. "Hughes, Penhaligon, me, maybe even Cecily." "You mentioned she said the egg could destroy you. Why?" His voice dropped. "Because I—" He hesitated. "Because she knew I was negotiating an arms deal, off the record, with a foreign intermediary. If word got out that I was linked to a stolen Russian artifact, it would be political suicide." Jane nodded slowly. "That's why she threatened you. But I believe you didn't kill her, because if you had—" She held up the torn telegram. "You wouldn't have left this behind." He blanched. "Where did you find that?" "In the study, beneath the cushion of the armchair. Shabby for a politician." "I never sent that," Miles said. "I didn't say you had." By nightfall, Jane had assembled the puzzle's edge. The theft of the Fabergé egg was not a crime of passion or opportunity. It was a transaction gone wrong. Clara had played too many sides, made too many threats, and someone had acted before she could act first. But there was one piece still missing, the location of the egg. If it hadn't been smuggled out of the house, then it had to still be somewhere within Briarwood Hall. And Jane now had one more reason to suspect who had taken it, because only one person had both access to the study and enough knowledge of Clara's intentions to know the exact moment to strike. Chapter 7. A Second Hand and a Second Lie. Jane sat in her room reviewing her notes. The threads were converging. A theft, a murder, a diplomatic scandal buried in a Fabergé egg. And among the suspects, each with motive and opportunity, someone had made a fatal error. And now she had found it. Her suspicions had taken root the night before, after speaking with Miles Everstone. The telegram fragment tucked beneath the armchair had been written on telegram paper specific to the Briarwood Hall stationery cabinet, a small but telling clue. Guests had no access to it, only residents and staff. But it wasn't just the telegram. Jane had returned to the blue salon, where the bridge game had taken place. The cards were long cleared, but she had made careful notes of where each guest had sat and the order of play. The duplicate scorecards still lay folded in the desk drawer. As she traced the final round's record, a pattern emerged, not in the hands themselves, but in the pauses, the missed plays, and the errors made by someone who prided themselves on precision. One of the players had deliberately played poorly, a sudden shift mid-game, a pattern that didn't match their earlier performance. Jane could see it now as clearly as if she were watching the game unfold again. Someone had used the bridge game as cover, a moment of distraction, a round missed, a convenient excuse to leave the table briefly under the guise of needing air. In the billiard room, Major Bertrand Hughes was practicing his shot, knocking the ivory cue ball into a corner pocket with practiced ease. He looked up as Jane entered. "Come to try your hand?" he asked gruffly. "Only at conversation," she replied. "You said something curious the other night, that Clara reminded you of someone bluffing at war." He chalked the cue. "She did. Too clever by half. Those types always end up getting themselves caught in the crossfire. Or they make enemies by knowing too much." His brow furrowed. Jane folded her arms. "You said you served in Russia, that you saw a twin to the Fabergé egg." "Yes, and that Clara asked questions." "She always did." "Did she ask you to help her steal it?" He lowered the cue and turned, eyes narrowing. Number I would have reported her if she had. "Would you?" Jane stepped forward. "You strike me as a man who values honour, but perhaps not above loyalty, to your fellow officers perhaps, or to your old commanding officers." He stiffened. "You were stationed in St. Petersburg, at the embassy." "I was, and your commanding officer was none other than Lord Oswald Penhaligon." Silence fell like a guillotine. Jane studied him. "You see, the egg wasn't just a diplomatic gift. It was a quiet understanding between two empires. If it were discovered in Penhaligon's possession, it would not only embarrass the crown, but draw attention to dealings during the Russo-Japanese conflict." Hughes said nothing. "You were part of that, not a thief, but a guard dog, one who was told to watch the estate, and to act if anything, or anyone, threatened that secret." He clenched his jaw. "She was about to sell it, to expose everything, but you didn't kill her, did you?" "No." His voice was hoarse. "I warned her. She laughed in my face, said I was just a relic in uniform." "So who did?" Hughes looked away. "You already know." In the West Wing, Lady Cecily Penhaligon had retired to her private drawing-room, claiming a headache. Jane knocked once and entered. Lady Cecily sat in an armchair by the fire, a book open in her lap, unread. Jane shut the door behind her. "You were the only person who didn't leave the table during the bridge game," she said. Lady Cecily didn't look up. "I was losing, badly, no reason to leave. But you made a critical play error in the fourth hand. Unusual for someone of your skill. I believe it was deliberate. You wanted to stay at the table, to be seen." "Why?" "Because you had already taken the egg." Lady Cecily's eyes met hers at last, cold, clear, calculating. Jane moved closer. "You knew where Lord Oswald kept the key, you knew when the study would be unguarded, and you knew that Clara was planning to make her move the very next day, but you moved first." "Prove it," she said softly. Jane held up a small brooch, a silver peacock feather, identical to the one Lady Cecily had worn 2 nights ago. "I found this in the billiard room, behind the carved griffin statue near the fireplace. There's a loose panel behind it, a hidden compartment." Lady Cecily said nothing. "I opened it. The egg was there." "Why hide it in your own house?" Jane asked. "Why not destroy it? Sell it, unless you still hope to use it. As leverage?" Lady Cecily's voice was low, almost whispering. He was going to leave me for her, Clara. She played him like a fiddle, promised him connections, relevance. She told him she could manage the egg. But I knew better. I knew it would ruin him, so I took it. Jane's voice was cold now. And the poison? I didn't kill her. Lady Cecily stood slowly, composed once more. I didn't have to. I watched her drink the wine. She never knew what was in it. Then who? I thought it was Miles. But now... She paused. Perhaps someone else was afraid of what Clara planned to reveal. In the conservatory, Jane found Lord Penhaligon in the conservatory. You kept the egg for 20 years, she said. I did. And now you've nearly lost everything for it. I know. She wanted to expose you. She wanted to own me, he said quietly. And when she realized I wouldn't give it to her, she turned to others. Bargaining, threats. She didn't care what damage she caused, as long as she profited. Jane watched him. So you decided to silence her? But I knew someone would. She drank poisoned wine, Jane said. Someone knew exactly which glass she'd reach for. Penhaligon sighed. I trusted the wrong people and protected the wrong secrets. The police will arrive tonight. I'll tell them what I've found, but I'll also give you until sundown to return the egg, to make a statement, Jane said. Penhaligon nodded, grave. You've given me more kindness than I deserve. That night. In the hearth of the study, the fire burned brightly. Jane sat at the desk, looking at her notes. The egg had been retrieved. Lady Cecily had confessed to the theft, but not the murder. Someone else had poisoned Clara's wine, and Jane knew, now, precisely who it was. Because only one person had handled the glasses that night. Only one person had stepped away under the pretense of checking the cellar for the rare vintage. And only one person had a reason to fear what Clara knew, not about the egg, but about him. The final confrontation was coming. Chapter 8. Checkmate at Briarwood. The drawing-room had been prepared just as Jane requested. The fire crackled low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. The velvet curtains had been drawn, the brandy untouched. Only a single lamp lit the centre table, where a modest stack of bridge scorecards sat beside a folded page of Clara de Vries's notebook. At precisely 8 o'clock, Jane Parsons stood before the gathered guests. Lord Oswald Penhaligon, seated in his high-backed armchair, looked more hollowed than ever. Lady Cecily, poised as always, sat with her hands folded in her lap and a quiet, unreadable expression. Major Hughes stood with arms crossed near the fireplace, and Miles Everstone lingered near the drinks cabinet, fidgeting with the cuff of his sleeve. The room was silent, but for the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Jane stepped forward, her voice calm and deliberate. "Thank you all for coming. I've asked you here to deliver the results of my investigation. A theft and a murder occurred under this roof, committed by 2 different hands, yet linked by one common thread." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Jane continued. Clara de Vries came to Briarwood Hall for more than a game of bridge. She came to conclude a sale. She had discovered the presence of the Fabergé egg, an object of historical and political significance, a gift from Tsar Nicholas II, meant to remain hidden as a symbol of quiet alliance. She intended to leverage it, either for financial gain or for political advantage. She held up a page from Clara's notebook. She met with several of you seeking buyers, and she had names. She knew who was desperate, who had secrets, who could be persuaded. Miles shifted uncomfortably. Jane caught the glance and nodded to him. She approached Mr. Everstone, threatening to expose his private dealings abroad. Perhaps she intended to blackmail him. Next she turned toward Lady Cecily. She also tried to seduce and manipulate Lord Penhaligon, but you, Lady Cecily, understood the risk better than anyone. You knew what that egg represented and what it could do if it left these walls." Lady Cecily's voice was quiet but resolute. "So I took it." "You found the hiding place, accessed the key and removed the egg the night before the game. You concealed it in the billiard room behind the loose panel, but you did not poison Clara. No, that act required intimate access to the wine, to the pouring, to the glasses themselves, and for that we must consider the events of dinner on the night of the murder." She walked slowly to the sideboard where the wine had been served. The Chateau Margaux was taken from Lord Penhaligon's private cellar, and it was Miles Everstone who offered to fetch the second bottle. Miles stepped back slightly, eyes wide. "Wait, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," Jane said gently, "that you knew which glass Clara would reach for, because you arranged for her to do so." He shook his head. That's not, she reached for mine. It was a mistake." Jane held up a hand. "Yes, it was a mistake. For her, not for you. You made sure the poisoned glass was nearest her, and when she reached for it, smiling, you let her." Miles paled. "No." "She had power over you," Jane continued. "She had records of your arms negotiations, illicit ones. If she exposed them, your career would collapse. Your future, gone." "No, I didn't mean," Miles stammered. "You used belladonna, slipped into the wine while you were fetching the bottle. A poison that mimics fainting, quiet, elegant, but lethal." Jane stepped closer. "You knew it wouldn't be traced easily, and you were counting on the theft to distract from her death." Miles was now shaking his head, voice trembling. "I just wanted her to stop. She said she'd ruin me. She laughed in my face." "Clara's final words," Jane said softly, "were, 'Shall we toast to better luck?' She knew the glass was suspicious, but she drank anyway, because she still believed she held the winning hand." Jane looked at him with something between pity and sadness. "You tried to silence her, but the moment she fell to the floor, you lost control of the narrative." Miles lowered himself onto the armrest of the nearest chair. Major Hughes growled, "Disgusting!" Lady Cecily said nothing, though her jaw had tightened visibly. Lord Penhaligon spoke at last. "You should have come to me, Miles." "And say what?" Miles snapped bitterly. "That a dead woman held the noose around my career? That I was being bled dry by a woman you were protecting?" Jane interrupted quietly. "No more. The authorities are on their way. I trust you'll give your statement." Miles didn't resist. He merely nodded, silent and broken. Later that night, as the rain eased into a soft mist, Jane walked alone through the halls of Briarwood. The egg had been returned to its case. The storm had passed. She paused at the grand staircase where Lord Penhaligon stood waiting. "You were right," he said. "Secrets rot in the dark." Jane gave a faint smile. Better they be buried properly than allowed to fester. Epilogue. 3 weeks later, the papers whispered of a tragic incident at Briarwood Hall. An art dealer found poisoned, a rare Russian artifact quietly returned to a private collection, and a rising politician who had stepped down due to health concerns. But Jane Parsons' name did not appear in any headlines. She had done her job, as always, in silence and with precision.